In what would become the most legendary tale in Pine Valley's history, a quiet farmstead transformed into the stage for a story of redemption that changed lives forever. What began as a brutal confrontation evolved into an inspiring narrative, one rooted in courage and second chances. When a notorious gang of outlaws targeted what they thought was a defenseless old veteran tending his garden, they were unaware they had crossed paths with James Morrison, a name whispered with reverence in the Special Forces community. A man whose unparalleled marksmanship had shaped the outcome of countless missions across 3 continents, saving hundreds of lives, now lived a life of quiet purpose. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this tale moves you, subscribe for more, as tomorrow I have something even more extraordinary to share. Morning mist curled over the rolling hills of Pine Valley, Montana, as James Morrison methodically cared for his heirloom tomatoes. At 68, his weathered hands worked with the same precision that once steadied advanced rifles on distant battlefields. The worn leather gloves he wore now shielded hands calloused by years of service. From his carefully arranged garden, Morrison could observe every approach to his property, an unconscious habit formed from decades of selecting strategic vantage points in dangerous territories. His modest farmhouse stood on 70 acres of meticulously cultivated farmland, a sanctuary built to replace the chaos he left behind. Sarah Chen, Morrison's nearest neighbor, often marveled at the perfection of his crops, joking that his rows were so straight they might have been guided by lasers. She wasn't far off. The same discipline that made Morrison a Special Forces legend now made him a master of organic farming. Yet, the tranquility of his garden belied the danger that loomed. The faint rumble of engines reached his ears. Too many, too close, and moving in formation. Old instincts stirred. Sarah arrived with her signature fresh-baked sourdough, her presence a welcome reprieve in Morrison's solitary life. At 45, the former ER nurse had become a surrogate daughter to the widower, unaware of the depths of his past. But even as they exchanged pleasantries, Morrison's sharp eyes and sharper mind processed the sounds of the approaching vehicles. The Carson Boys, a gang making waves in nearby counties, had started targeting small towns like Pine Valley. And now they had arrived. Later that afternoon, Morrison's sharp instincts proved correct. Vehicles pulled onto his property, their tactical precision unmistakable. Marcus Carson, the gang's leader, stepped out, his movements revealing a past steeped in military discipline. His men flanked him, their postures betraying their own combat training. But as Carson studied Morrison's meticulously arranged garden, his gaze narrowed, recognizing something more: strategic lines of sight, calculated spacing, and optimal vantage points. "You've got quite a setup here," Carson remarked, a wolfish grin on his face. Almost like someone with tactical experience planned it. Morrison's reply was calm, measured, yet brimming with purpose. "A garden teaches you a lot about patience, Mr. Carson, and about being prepared." The air between them crackled with tension, each man silently sizing up the other. What Carson and his crew failed to realize was that they weren't facing just another retired veteran. They were challenging a man who had lived through the darkest corners of humanity, who had mastered the art of war, and who now stood ready to defend the peace he had fought so hard to find. As the sun climbed higher over Pine Valley, Morrison returned to his garden. To any outsider, he was just another farmer tending his crops. But to those who knew him, James Morrison was a force to be reckoned with, a man who had weathered life's fiercest storms and was prepared to face whatever came next. The Carson boys were about to learn the hard way that some battles are won long before the first shot is fired. Here's a polished and engaging rewrite of the passage with a focus on maintaining suspense and depth. The silence between James Morrison and Marcus Carson stretched like a taut bowstring, heavy with unspoken truths. Carson's voice dropped, his tone sharper, more pointed. "Got a theory," he said, studying Morrison with the scrutiny of a man who'd spent years reading threats. "About Kandahar, 2005. 4 impossible shots saved an entire Ranger platoon. Shots that rewrote the rules of ballistics. Never found out the shooter's name, just a call sign. Ghostmaker." Morrison carefully placed another ripe tomato into his basket, his expression unreadable. Read about that in the papers once. Quite the story. Carson didn't smile. Thing is, he pressed, those shots weren't just skill. They showed an understanding of physics most snipers don't have. The kind of understanding that might plan a perfect organic garden. His gaze swept the rows of heirloom tomatoes, their arrangement betraying the precision of a seasoned tactician. The tension between them thickened. Carson's men shifted subtly, their instincts reacting to the shift in their leader's tone. Finally, Carson broke the silence. Pine Valley is changing. New management. New opportunities. A man with your skills, he said, his voice hardening, could write his own ticket. Unless he let the threat hang in the air. He decides to make things difficult. Morrison straightened, his movements deliberate, his posture subtly shifting into something Carson's men unconsciously recognized, confidence born of decades of experience. Several of them took involuntary steps back. Only ticket I'm interested in, Morrison replied quietly, is the one I write every Saturday at the farmer's market. Simple life suits me. Carson tilted his head. Until it gets complicated, he said, his voice colder. Shame if something happened to these perfect gardens. Or maybe to that nice Dr. Torres's clinic. Or Sarah Chen's practice. Morrison's eyes locked onto Carson's, and for the first time, the younger man felt a chill he couldn't explain. In those eyes, he saw something familiar, a lethal focus that had guided impossible shots across impossible distances. Way I see it, Morrison said, his tone calm but unyielding. Complications work both ways. They can appear when you least expect them, and disappear just as fast. Carson held Morrison's gaze for a long moment, the unspoken recognition passing between them. Finally, he smirked, a predator's smile tinged with grudging respect. We'll be seeing you around, old man. Think about what I said. A man like you shouldn't waste his talents on tomatoes. With that, he turned, signaling his men to retreat. As the vehicles disappeared down the dirt road, Morrison resumed his work, his movements unhurried, but his mind sharp. Carson's words confirmed what he'd suspected. These weren't ordinary criminals. They were lost warriors, veterans like himself, whose wounds ran deeper than the surface. Moments later, Sarah Chen's car pulled into the driveway. She'd been watching from a safe distance, her nurse's instincts attuned to danger. Those men, she said, stepping out cautiously, they weren't just here for protection money, were they? No, Morrison replied, placing a ripe tomato into his basket. They were looking for something else. Something they lost in the war. Something they might just find again, but not the way they expect. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across Pine Valley. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Morrison knew. But for now, he focused on planting seeds, both in the soil and, perhaps, in the hearts of men who had forgotten who they used to be. Here's an engaging rewrite that maintains the emotional weight and suspense while improving clarity and flow. Sarah Chen's intuition was rarely wrong. As she watched James Morrison's weathered hands carefully adjust a tomato vine, she sensed there was more to his story than anyone in Pine Valley could imagine. Sheriff Matthews confirmed her suspicions, sliding a classified folder onto the porch table. It wasn't about the shots, was it? He asked, his tone heavy with understanding. Morrison's hands stilled momentarily. No, he replied softly. It was about the lives saved. Every shot had a purpose beyond hitting a target. The folder contained more than mission reports. It held commendations, citations, and psychological evaluations. They painted a portrait of a man who had wielded his skills not as weapons, but as tools to protect others. Sheriff Matthews leaned forward, pulling out a specific document. This one caught my attention, about why you left. About Tran. Morrison's movements faltered, just briefly. The evening breeze carried the scent of ripening vegetables as he spoke. Tran wasn't just another mission. Had a clear shot, confirmed target, high-level terrorist. Everything by the book. He paused, his voice tightening. But I saw something through the scope. The way he moved, his behavior. He wasn't just a terrorist. He was a former Special Forces operator. American. someone who'd lost his way after too many hard deployments. Matthew's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Like Carson. Morrison nodded slowly. Took the shot, clean, professional. But it stayed with me. I started seeing patterns. How many come back from war carrying wounds deeper than flesh? How some lose their way and become what we once fought against. Sarah, ever the healer, broke the silence. That's why you started the garden, isn't it? To grow something instead of destroy. Morrison's expression softened. Needed something to nurture. Found out the same skills, patience, precision, attention to detail, work just as well for creating life as they do for taking it. The sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. 2 of Carson's SUVs passed the farm, their movements slower, less aggressive. Sheriff Matthews noted the change. They're talking about what happened at the clinic. About you. Word spreading Kandahar, Tran, how you used your skills to protect, not destroy. Morrison's eyes followed the vehicles, his gaze steady. It's not about who I am. It's about who they still can be. Every warrior has to choose their path after combat. Some lose their way. Sarah's voice carried an unspoken truth. But some can find it again. Jason Turner's truck appeared on the dirt road, his expression resolute as he approached. Got something you need to hear, he called out. About Carson's real plans. Why he chose Pine Valley. He hesitated, meeting Morrison's eyes with newfound respect. And about why knowing who you are changes everything. Morrison gestured to the porch chairs, his tactical mind already at work. Tell me. As Jason explained Carson's operation, Morrison listened intently. The garden, its rows aligned with military precision, stood as a silent witness. Each plant, like Morrison's past actions, served a purpose larger than itself. You could have stopped them today, Jason observed, his tone edged with curiosity. You had the tactical advantage. Perfect position. Why didn't you? Morrison's reply was quiet but firm. Because some targets need to be saved, not eliminated. Learned that in Tran. Sometimes the hardest shots are the ones you don't take, the ones that give someone a chance to find their way back. Dawn broke over Pine Valley as Morrison inspected his irrigation lines, his movements deliberate. Jason's intelligence painted a troubling picture. Carson was calling in reinforcements, 30 more men, including seasoned combat veterans. They've heard about the ghost of Kandahar, Jason said, his voice tinged with both fear and hope. Some want to prove themselves. Others, they're curious. Sarah arrived, urgency in her voice. 3 more veterans came to my clinic last night, Carson's men, but they weren't there for threats. They were asking questions about Tran, about redemption, about how to walk back from the edge. The morning stillness shattered as SUVs roared past. Their aggressive driving betrayed Carson's slipping control, not just over the town, but over his men. Jason confirmed, Carson's calling a mandatory meeting. All combat veterans. Says he's going to address the ghost situation. Morrison caught movement at the edge of his property. 2 of Carson's lieutenants, Hayes and Collins, approached on foot. Their postures were non-threatening, hands visible. Sir, Hayes called out, unconsciously using the military honorific. We need to talk. About Kandahar. About what really happened. Morrison's voice remained calm. Tomatoes need tending. But I've got coffee on the porch. The veterans hesitated. Before accepting the unspoken test, lowering their guards as they Saturday, Carson's losing it, Collins admitted. This was supposed to be about purpose. Structure. Now, he gestured toward the town. Now we're just another gang. Morrison's gaze was steady. And you're becoming what you once fought against. Hayes shifted uncomfortably. Those shots in Kandahar, they weren't just legendary because of the skill. They were about protecting people. About precision with purpose. The shots weren't the mission, Morrison replied. The mission was saving lives. As more vehicles appeared on the horizon, Morrison noted the subtle shifts. Carson's organization was fracturing, loyalties splitting along lines of conscience. Sheriff Matthews arrived, bringing troubling news. State police are backing off. Carson called in favors. He's getting desperate. Hayes nodded grimly. He's talking about making examples, proving no one can stand against him, not even the ghost. Morrison's garden stretched before them, each row a testament to precision and purpose. Thing about examples, he said quietly, is they teach different lessons to different people. Question is, what lesson are you learning? The sound of approaching vehicles carried urgency, but Morrison's movements remained calm. He adjusted a tomato vine, his hands steady.
Tran taught me something, he said, his
voice firm. Sometimes the hardest targets aren't the ones you eliminate. They're the ones you save. Here's an enhanced and compelling rewrite that maintains the dramatic tension and emotional depth. The morning sun climbed higher as vehicles continued to gather in Pine Valley's town square. Carson's forces were assembling, a show of strength meant to intimidate, but among them, Morrison could see the cracks. Divided loyalties flickered like uncertain shadows across the formation, men torn between following orders and following their conscience. He'll push back hard, Collins warned, standing by his truck. He won't accept losing control. Control's an illusion in combat, Morrison replied, walking the two veterans to their vehicle. Real strength comes from knowing your mission, same as it always did. As Hayes and Collins departed, Sarah watched them with her keen, empathetic eyes. They're different now, she noted, carrying themselves like soldiers again, not thugs. Morrison nodded, his tone quiet but resolute. Because they're remembering. Sometimes, the path back to honor starts with a simple choice, like two warriors choosing to have coffee with someone they were sent to intimidate. The peaceful morning shattered as Carson's voice boomed over vehicle-mounted speakers, summoning his men to assemble. But beneath the commanding tone lay something raw and desperate, the sound of a warrior trying to cling to power through fear. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across Pine Valley's town square as Carson's forces formed ranks. 40 men, most of them combat veterans, stood in disciplined formation, their movements sharp but not uniform. Morrison, observing through his rifle scope from a concealed position on the ridge, noted the subtle signs of division. There were fractional delays in following orders, uncertain glances, and unconscious spacing between groups, signs of men questioning their allegiance. Got movement on the North Ridge. Jason's voice crackled over the radio Sheriff Matthews had provided. 8-man team, combat spacing. Looks like Carson's bringing in his sharpshooters. Morrison's trained eye had already marked their positions. Their movements were professional, but flawed. They had been trained well, but they'd forgotten the deeper lessons about why warriors fight. He's going to make a show of force, Hayes reported through the radio. The former ranger, now firmly aligned with Morrison, had taken up position near the square with Collins. Wants to prove the ghost can't stop him. Morrison's scope followed Carson as he paced before his assembled men. The former Force Recon commander's movements betrayed his inner turmoil, military precision clashing with the desperation creeping into his voice. You all know who's watching us. Carson's voice boomed, laced with anger. The legendary ghost of Kandahar, the shooter who made impossible shots. His bitter laugh echoed across the square. But what good did those shots do? We came home to a country that didn't want us, didn't understand us. Now we're taking what we deserve. Through his scope, Morrison studied the reactions among Carson's men. Postures shifted, and the subtle tells of moral conflict became apparent. He read these signs as clearly as wind indicators and range calculations, warriors grappling with their choices. Got movement, Sarah reported from her observation post near the clinic. 4 of Carson's men just broke formation. They're heading toward the hardware store. Let them go, Morrison replied quietly. Some shots are better not taken. Carson's voice rose, his frustration mounting as he noticed the deserters. This is what he does. He tries to divide us, make us question our strength. But we're not weak. We're warriors. And our skills give us power. Morrison, still tracking through his scope, whispered to himself. Wrong lesson, Marcus. The breaking point came when Carson barked an order for his men to take up positions around the town. We're going to show Pine Valley what real power looks like. Anyone who stands with the ghost becomes a target. That's not why we serve. Hayes's voice rang out, cutting through the tension. The former ranger stepped forward, his stance unwavering. "That's not why we took the oath." Carson's harsh laugh crackled with bitterness. "The oath? The oath got us scars and nightmares. I'm offering you real power." "No," Collins said, stepping to Hayes' side. His Marine training radiated in every deliberate movement. "You're offering us the chance to become what we once fought against. That's not power. That's surrender." Morrison's scope captured the moment Carson's control began to unravel. One by one, more veterans stepped away from the formation, moving to stand with Hayes and Collins. They weren't running. They weren't attacking. They were choosing their ground with quiet, tactical precision. Carson's voice cracked with desperation. "They'll kill you all."
"Ghost."
"I know you're watching." Morrison's scope tracked the commander, his voice calm, carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "It's not about me, Marcus. It's about them. About remembering who they were and who they still can be." As the afternoon sun dipped lower, the square became a battleground, not of weapons, but of choices. And for the first time, Morrison could see hope breaking through the cracks of a fractured army. "Take the shot." Carson's voice roared, his desperation echoing across the square. "Show them what all your precision and skill really mean." Morrison's finger rested steady on the trigger of his rifle, his breathing calm. But he wasn't aiming at Carson. Through his scope, he tracked the hostile sniper teams on the ridge, monitoring their movements. Below, in the square, something more powerful than a bullet was taking shape. "He won't take the shot," Jason's voice rang out, clear and steady as he stepped forward. "Because he understands what you've forgotten, sir. Our skills aren't for destruction. They're for protection." One by one, more veterans stepped forward, moving to stand with Hayes and Collins. Morrison's scope captured their faces, not filled with anger or fear, but with recognition, remembrance, a quiet, unspoken understanding of who they were meant to be. "You're all traitors." Carson's voice cracked, his grip tightening on his weapon. His desperation overcame his training as he raised his rifle. Morrison's shot cracked through the valley, precise and deliberate, striking a point 3 feet above Carson's head. The impact sent dust and splinters flying, freezing everyone in place. "That was a warning shot," Hayes called out, his voice calm and authoritative. "But you know his reputation, sir. If he'd wanted you dead, you'd be dead. He's giving you the same choice he's giving all of us, to remember what it means to be a warrior." The weight of silence that followed was heavier than any words. Through his scope, Morrison saw the subtle shifts in Carson's stance, the internal war between pride and recognition, between power and purpose. Carson's voice finally broke the quiet, softened by something closer to wonder. "Those shots in Kandahar, you could have eliminated the entire enemy force. But you only took the shots that protected our unit." Morrison's voice carried across the square, steady and resolute, though he remained hidden. The mission was never about killing. It was about protecting. Same as it always was. Same as it still is.